Evidence that populations change over time. Scientific theories are based on large amounts of evidence gathered through observation and experimentation and are generally accepted by the experts in the field. The phrase, "it's just a theory," is misleading and leads to wrong conclusions. We have already seen some evidence that natural selection occurs and populations change over time. Let's take a look at some other lines of evidence supporting the theory of evolution. The evidence will be presented in 4 areas: fossils, anatomy comparisons, DNA and protein sequence comparisons, and animal embryo comparisons. Fossils are preserved when sedimentary rock forms around the remains of living things. Very old layers of sedimentary rock can be lifted to the surface by plate tectonics, giving us access to old fossils. We know how old fossils are because we can tell the age of the rock in which they are preserved. Numerous fossil discoveries allow us to trace the evolution of living species to their extinct ancestors. The deepest layers of rock are the oldest layers. Fossils tell us about the bodies of extinct species and how species have changed. For many living species, such as the horse, we have very complete fossil records, with teeth and bone samples from many time points. Look at the changes in the forefeet and teeth of the horse over the last 55 million years. They show change over time, evolution, from Hyracotherium to Equus. The stromatolites are the oldest fossils of life on Earth. They are fossilized bacterial colonies and are 3.6 billion years old. The Ediacaran fossil is approximately 550 million years old. It was one of the earliest multicellular animals. This video is about the most completely preserved dinosaur specimen ever found. It's not just a skeleton, it's a whole dinosaur. The nodosaur lived 110 million years ago. Click here to watch the dinosaur video. The best fossil evidence for evolution are transitional fossils. Transitional fossils are from extinct species, but they show us the intermediate body plans between old and new types of species. They show a path from ancestors to their descendants. They possess features of both the ancestors and their descendants. Since evolution is the change in populations over time, it is supported by physical evidence of intermediate steps, transitions from old to new. Mahakala is a transitional fossil between dinosaurs and birds. It shows features of both dinosaurs and birds and indicates that birds evolved from dinosaurs. Tiktaalik is a transitional fossil between fish and amphibians. It shows features of both fish and amphibians and indicates that amphibians evolved from fish. Anatomy is the study of body structures. When we compare the anatomies of different types of organisms, we see similar structures used over and over again, but in each species, the structure may have changed over time and become adapted to carry out different functions. The best explanation is that they evolved from a common ancestor with these characteristics. This is evidence for descent with modification. All the skeletons in this picture are from different species, but they all have skulls, backbones, forelimbs, and ribs. Evidence for descent with modification from a common ancestor. Homologous structures are parts of animals that look similar to parts of other animals, even if they perform different functions. They are evidence for a common ancestor. The figure on the next slide shows limb bones of 4 different mammals. They are labeled with the functions that each perform for the identified mammal. Here we have a human arm. It's used for grabbing, throwing, holding, and fine manipulation. Here we have a cat leg, or cat limb, that's used for jumping, landing, and running. Here, in a whale, that same appendage is used for swimming and changing direction, and in a bat, it's used for flying. Natural selection placed pressure on ancient populations. Not all organisms could get enough to eat. avoid predators, and reproduce in their ecosystems. Variations in limbs that could help swim, fly, walk on land, hold things, or dig in soil were advantageous for the individuals that had them. Over millions of years, the limbs changed and new species emerged as adaptations were selectively passed to offspring. The limbs of all these organisms, including humans, evolved from a fish. The Galapagos finches are evidence for a common ancestor as shown in this tree of life. Their populations evolved over time as finches with the right beak for the seeds in their environment were able to survive and reproduce more. The central paradigm of biology, DNA to RNA to protein, leads to structure and function. You and your family members have similar body structures. Perhaps you have the same nose as one of your parents. Perhaps you have the same hair as one of your siblings. That makes sense. You share DNA inherited from your ancestors. If you saw these 4 people on the street, you would be able to tell that these children are related to the adults in the picture. They look alike and they share DNA. DNA and protein sequences all depend on a universal genetic code. All cells carry out transcription and translation to make proteins using the same system with exactly the same code. The process is the same in every living cell on Earth. The universal code is shown on the next slide. DNA to RNA to protein. Here is the universal code. The DNA of a lion is very similar to that of a tiger, and less similar to that of a human, validating that lions and tigers are more closely related. All species share genes required to carry out basic cellular processes. By comparing these gene and protein sequences, we can gather evidence about how closely related one species is to others. Like anatomy comparisons, DNA and protein comparisons give evidence for descent with modification. Mouse and fly versions of the same gene can be aligned and compared. Here's a comparison of part of the mouse and fly genes. These gene sequences are 76.66% similar. The proteins corresponding to these regions are 100% similar. Cytochrome C is a protein involved in making ATP that is used by all species. That makes it a good choice to compare DNA sequences between species by examining the percentage differences of its amino acids. The chart indicates that humans are more closely related to chimpanzees and less related to garden snails. Over time, benign, random mutations accumulate in each branch of the tree of life. Each species ends up with its own variation on an ancestor's gene. The chart indicates humans and garden snails diverged from a common ancestor before humans diverged from chimpanzees on the tree of life. Very early in development, when an animal is an embryo inside an egg or a uterus, the embryos of different species resemble one another. All animals share similar genetic programs that control early development, which is strong evidence that all animals share a common ancestor. As we grow and develop, other genes go to work and species-unique adaptations become more apparent. There are many lines of evidence that support the idea that populations change over time, the theory of evolution. We have looked at 4 lines of evidence: fossils and their distribution, anatomy comparisons, DNA and protein sequence comparisons, and animal embryo comparisons. Scientists also do experiments to test the theory of evolution. No experiment has ever disproved natural selection, descent with modification, or the theory of evolution. The theory of evolution explains both the unity and diversity of life. The idea of descent with modification explains why all living things have so much in common. The idea of natural selection explains how our planet became filled with so many different types of life. Everything that we learn about living things makes sense in the context of evolution.